Well, awesome, everybody. Well, welcome to 2025 to our biweekly webinar. It's really excited here to kick off the year. Thanks Jim for joining here on this one. We host this webinar biweekly. Myself, a little bit about myself. I'm Ryan Poole. I'm a real estate agent, just like you all. Been doing this for over 20 years. I'm also the founder of RealTrade, which is an online marketplace and social media platform for real estate. The cool thing is, agents, it's free for agents. You can create a profile, and imagine this: you can get direct leads right off your listing, and then you could also connect on the social aspect to awesome service providers like Jim, like Jeff, and other contractors, inspectors, appraisers. So want you to check that out. Just Google RealTrade and you could sign up if you haven't. Of course, I just want to introduce my co-host here, Jim Brown. He's the founder of New Path Title, the awesome closing software, Title Leap, and his law business, Jim Brown's Law, which is awesome. Just what a heck of an entrepreneur. And, we do this to add value to us agents, right? One of Jim's favorite sayings, iron sharpens iron. We learn from each other. We share. There's been a massive amounts of change in our industry, especially within the last year, obviously with the NAR settlements. And of course, our contracts have never had more changes in our industry. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And it's pretty amazing that we have a real estate attorney here with Jim shepherding us through all these changes and bringing amazing value on this webinar. So go ahead, Jim. Why don't you take us away?
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to work for you guys. If you guys can like and subscribe us, that'd be great. We got a new closing cost calculator on the top of our website. It used to be tons of people would use it. Now there's a lot of closing cost calculators out there. Ours is the only one I've seen that has buyer and seller concessions and all the new features that people are looking for after the BBAs and all the compensation agreements. My goal is to tell you guys things you won't hear anyplace else. Plain and simple. You can go a million places for content. I'm going to bring you perspectives and info you won't hear anyplace else. There's no dumb questions. If you can turn on your cameras, that'd be great. I can see your responses. We can move through the material quicker. Question and answer session at the end. Ryan's going to give you guys some time-saving tools and tips, and RealTrade is the shortcut to the double dip. There's no doubt about it. Platforms like that are his platform. That's the way of the future. There's no doubt about it. You guys can text me 24/7. If you go to newpathtitle.com and look for 24/7 attorney support, you'll see my number. My kids are grown and gone. This is my pet.
Oh, we just lost Jim. Let's see if he could sign back in. Hang on one second. Pretty amazing though what Jim that he has on his New Path Title, being able to text him 24/7, guys. Take advantage of that. That's an incredible tool. I actually, even though I've been in real estate here for, over 20 years, I have a lot of questions that I can't necessarily answer, and Jim's always available for that. So there's Taj there. There he is. Here, you want to unmute? You want to unmute Jim? There you go. Here, can you hear us? We're having a little technical difficulties. Can't hear you, Jim. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Now
right.
There you. Make sure this is recording, Jim, too.
It was not. Let's see. Captions, more. I don't have, let's see. Okay, I guess it is. Stop recording. Yep, it is recording.
Okay, cool.
All right. Where was I? So text me any future topics you want to hear about, and there's no dumb questions. Anybody that has questions and you want to linger after the show, I'm happy to answer everybody until we exhaust every single question you could possibly have. All right, without further ado, I'm going to launch into it. I've been studying massively how to be a better presenter. And so listening to the critics, I have decided that I'm going to move quicker and I'm going to keep things shorter and I'm going to go less in the weeds. So having said all that, we're going to do 3 topics today. We're going to talk about the financing provision. I'm calling it part 2 because we did a dive before Christmas, not well attended. And I got a ton of calls after the session. So I think there were questions that were lingering. We're going to do the FAR bar changes for 2025. and I'm going to give you some homestead. I'm going to give you some marketing content that you guys can rebrand and you can use. So I'm going to try to give you guys some marketing stuff every week that you guys can use on your own. Here's my pledge to you. I'm going to keep it shorter, more concise. The outlines are going to be briefer, if that's such a word. And I'm going to provide info and perspectives you won't hear anyplace else. That's my pledge to you for 2025. All right, here's the marketing piece. So you guys can use this and you can rebrand it, but here's some content that if you want to push out a couple times a week, every other week, whatever you want to do until March 3rd, this is a good way to stay top of mind. And it's not the typical homestead stuff. This is homestead stuff with a twist. So I give you guys a little bit of an idea on the program that you can run. Here's a statement that you can put in your reference line to grab the attention of your buyers and sellers. You know, everybody says the same thing over and over. It's value content marketing, but the reality is not many people are doing a good job.
Yep.
They're giving you stuff that's not very valuable. And so if you can do value content marketing and really provide things, I'm going to give you guys valuable stuff. I'm going to try to do one every session that you can lever. Here are some tips to save. This is the content you'd send your buyers and sellers or prospective buyers and sellers. Here are some tips to save you thousands in Florida property taxes and help secure your title against fraudsters. Break it down a little bit. If you close in your home or live in your home before December 31st, 2024, or if you moved in after January, you click here to file your homestead. If you sold a Florida homestead, here's what people don't know about portability. Yep. If you sold your Florida homestead, you could be entitled to a ton of money in portability. It's estimated that people are paying in upwards of $5 billion in excess Florida property taxes because they didn't properly take homestead portability.
I just want to add something real quick. This is
$5 billion a year.
No, I just want to add this has made some of my clients so happy of giving this information. And Jim, this outline that you have is going to be emailed to everybody in attendance of the webinar. So you'll have this link and you can just copy and paste this to your clients, which is awesome. I've had so many clients, love me for this kind of stuff. They couldn't believe it.
So they can click here to look at their portability. So if you're working with clients that are thinking about buying and they're saying, oh, I can't afford the taxes, you can be top of mind, being the smartest agent on the block and remind them, yeah, you can take the captured, depressed tax base from your sold property to your purchased property. And here's where you calculate it. Here's where you file your application. And I would use this statewide, right? This is a statewide or even out of state buyers and sellers outline that you can send around. And then anybody that's not in Palm Beach County can go to their local property appraiser and get these websites. There are 3 principal benefits to Florida homestead. Not everybody knows this. There's the cap on increase, there's the deduction, and there's the exemption from judgment creditors. For those of you old enough to remember, that's the O.J. Simpson rule. There's a little bit about homestead. And then here's one biggie that is grabbing a lot of attention. There's a bunch of different plans being circulated commercially called LifeLock and all these things. You could throw your own little twist in there and you could say, hey, there's no need to pay for outside services. Most counties now are offering free notification systems. And so here's the one for Palm Beach County. And what happens when somebody's recording something against your title, you make sure that the address is proper and you'll be notified.
Hey, Jim, wasn't there a change to the homestead too? If the CPI percentage is less than 3%, your increase in homestead or your in taxes is limited to that?
Yep. They ratcheted it down in case we have low price increases. So, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one benefit of the homestead though, right? Is if the prices go down, it kind of locks down there, which especially if you own a condo, right? Which the prices are falling on condos right now. You know what I mean? It even makes it more valuable. Yeah.
Amy, I saw you just logged in. I'm going to give you guys a link just to break it down back up real quick. There's a link right here you can use for marketing tools. You can use this copy, just click on it, you'll get the outline. So send that out a few times before March 3rd and you'll be top of mind with your agents. We revised our magic contract language statement. So I give you guys some I call it magic contract language. It's statements we've used over the years. And there's one right here. So here, when representing buyers and you'd like to shift the burden and cost of permits and the association violations to the seller, we have seen inserted in FAR section 20. Here's some language that we've seen, and I've revised it and modified it over the years. The provision I just added was this provision and related clauses shall survive closing. So if the issue of permits not being closed comes up after closing and you've got a disgruntled buyer, they can go back and lean into this. It doesn't die. So there's a doctrine of merger in all contracts and deeds in Florida, which says unless you specifically reserve the issue post-closing, all issues, all warranties, all representations merge into the deed and die at closing. So if you had any claims, they're extinguished when you take the deed or give the money. When you put in something like this provision and related clauses shall survive closing, that means after the closing, these things are alive and well and in play and for the benefit of your clients. And we recently saw a couple of these issues come up where buyers didn't realize there were open permits and it just would have saved a lot of time and put the burden back on sellers to fix these issues post-closing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, cool. Whoever has their cameras on, I hugely appreciate you. We revised our magic contract. All right, so here is the revised FAR bar. Everybody aware, show of hands, the FAR bar was revised. I heard about it months ago and then I forgot. Revisions, these are not hugely substantive revisions. If you've been over this, great, but I gave you a outline of the revisions that was provided by the Association of Realtors. On the bottom of the form, you're going to recognize it quickly. It says as is 7/12/24. Line 140 and line 154. These sections that they've revised are mainly for the benefit of title agents, Tajay and Christian, if you're online, and Elena. Hallelujah. They finally put this stuff in writing. We don't have to argue for our fees anymore. And there's a bunch of clarifications that as agents, I wouldn't spend time focusing on. The one thing that is relevant that you guys should be aware of, I get this call all the time, paragraph 15. So if in the event of default, I get agents calling me very frequently and saying, yeah, it didn't close and we want our portion of the split due to the buyer's agent. The contract took that out. So if there is going to be an agreement in the event of default, I'd have to think about it further and we can talk about it if anybody has more questions, how you would structure your compensation should there be a default, but there is no longer a provision in the contract for this. Everybody know what I'm talking about? All right. Paragraph 19. They added some addenda. There was a contract version that was floating during the summer for a couple of months, a month or so, and it had this FF and GG. For whatever reason, they revised the contract. They didn't change it was down here. See where it says XX at the very bottom? Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
They did away with the XX. They went to version 7 and they added these two back in. They deleted them for a while. They was in there, they deleted them, and now it's back in there. So those FF and GG revision addendums for buyer broker compensation and seller's agreement with respect to broker compensation. Tajay, are you seeing a whole lot of those coming through in our contracts?
Yes, I think we are seeing way more of it. buyer's agents, or even putting in still in their additional terms, and additionally still having that document filled out.
Cool. And then here, because the MLS no longer has compensation, they deleted that one little statement. In your outline, there's a hyperlink to the revised contract form. And without further ado, we will jump into the main topic. Look at that, 20 minutes, and we've already killed 2/3 of what we were going to talk about today. Seriously, if I can get you guys in and out, and I'm not going so fast that it's not, it's like firing bullets.
No, it's great value. I mean, that alone, that homesteading and portability email, you could be a hero. Save your clients thousands of dollars, literally with one email, and now you're the hero. They're going to refer you to other people.
There's a woman that I used to work for up in North County. She stopped using me for closing a million years ago. Her brokerage got an in-house title company, and they started using the in-house title company. I still get her value proposition emails, and I would never use her, but she's top of mind. And if I was a buyer or seller getting that stuff, because she doesn't send around hokey stuff, she sends around good quality content that I actually take the time to read. Even if I would never use her, she's still top of mind. If I was a buyer or a seller and I didn't know 4 million agents, I'm sure I would think about using her. All right. Here we are in the financing provision. If the financing provision of the Florida bar was a video game and paragraph 8 was worth 100 points, most agents would only get about 30. Not in a bad way. It's just they don't know how to get the other 70. Here's how to get a leg up on the other agent and stay ahead of your clients. Or put another way, if everyone goes through a yellow and red lights all day, every day, there is no problem until there is a problem. And you would be amazed how many agents are going through red and yellow lights every day, all day. It's just reality. And so the goal isn't to make anybody feel bad. The goal is to elevate the profession. Did anybody read that danger report I talked about? So there's a danger report that was issued. I think Amy Jo called me about it. Was it Amy Jo? Somebody called me about it. There's a document. It's called the danger report. It was issued 10 years ago. It was a bunch of consultants, and they said that the single biggest threat to the real estate profession is agents that don't know the rules, that only do a couple deals a year. All right. Paragraph 8 of the Florida bar. Cash can be elected and you can close with a loan. Goes without saying, I'm sure. But if they do, I get calls from agents. No, they elected cash. How can they make this a loan? It can be a loan as long as they show up with money at the day of the closing. I always say, if their dad decides to loan them money at the last minute and they show her their mom and they show up at closing with the money in their pocket, it doesn't matter what they elected. It's just a matter of whether they can close or not. Line 39. Okay, here's the best single piece of advice I'm going to give you guys for the day. If you remember nothing else, if you put a dollar value in here, if you elect a finance transaction and you put a dollar value in here, that is the single best way to fly under the radar, not raise red flags, and not attach the appraisal contingency, and protect your client if you're a buyer. It's also a good indication if you're a seller, if they have a loan amount in there that seems disproportionately high, that there's a good chance this thing won't close. So it's a great opportunity to protect your buyer. And it's a great opportunity as a selling agent to check for red flags, but it's never used. I mean, I can't tell you the number of contracts I see that don't have a value in there. And it's the single easiest thing there is to do. And you don't pull the value out of your magic hat. You ask your client for the value. And if the client doesn't know the value, then you talk to the mortgage broker about the value, but that's the value that goes in there.
So you're saying write a number, don't write a percentage, Jim.
Write a number. Don't write a percentage. A percentage will get you there, but for whatever reason, a number is real. And when people are looking at contracts and they see percentages, you'd be amazed how many people don't pause to do the math. If you put a number in there, you don't have to pause. If you're a seller's agent, you see a disproportionately high number, red flag. If you're a buyer's agent, you want to make sure you're protected regardless of an appraisal contingency or anything else. Put a number in there, you're protected.
Expound on, like, I guess we'll get to it, but you mean you're protected if they don't get the loan in that amount, then they can get out of the contract.
Yeah.
So if they don't get a loan approval of that exact amount that you write in the financing in the contract, they got it out.
And why is that?
Yeah.
That is because of this line right here. If you look at line 92, can everybody see my cursor?
Yeah.
When they're talking about financing, they're talking about the buyer getting a loan approval in a certain percentage, in a certain interest rate for the purchase of the property, fixed or adjustable in the loan amount. Capital L, capital A. It even says, see paragraph 2C. 2C is the financing provision we just talked about. So if the contract is for 400 and you put in 350 in this line here, and the lender only approves them for 340, then the buyer's protected from that perspective. It's also black and white from the seller's perspective. There's no going back and forth. No, we don't like the terms. Oh, it's bad faith, because there's another clause in the contract we're going to talk about where sellers actually can hold up deposits for bad faith buyers. So by putting a dollar value in there, you've provided yourself a contingency on line 94 because of this word defined term loan amount. Is that clear, you guys?
Yeah.
All right. That is your buyer's best friend. Don't fight over the buyer not getting a conventional appraisal, get an acknowledgement, buyer got their appraisal. So also in this provision here, there is a statement that buyer's mortgage broker, so the loan is contingent on two things: buyer obtaining approval and buyer's mortgage broker receiving an appraisal. Can you see my highlights?
Yep, I can see it, Jim.
Nobody knows that the loan is contingent on or let's put it this way: nobody acts that we see regularly on the basis that those two things exist. So what does the good agent do? The really prudent agent confirms that the buyer's lender has their appraisal, or that they don't need an appraisal. It's an extra step, but it's part of the checklist of stuff that we have to do as a seller's agent or as a buyer's agent. Because I've seen deals cancel because the lender pulled out because they didn't get their appraisal, and everybody was like, what do you mean you didn't get an appraisal? You know, how is that even relevant? In the new contract form, not the one that was just revised that we talked about a few minutes ago, but the one that was revised more recently, they added the mortgage appraisal contingency. Line 98, buyers have to use good faith and diligent effort. If they don't, sellers can call the mortgage broker and ask if the sellers can sit on the buyer's deposits. What does that mean? So in line 98, it says that the buyer is going to make application and use good faith and diligent effort to obtain the loan approval for financing. If they don't do that, it is literally a buyer's default. If it's a buyer's default, then the seller can not release the deposits. What does it take to break escrow? One of two things: a judge has to order, or the parties have to agree. Any title agent worth their salt cannot release escrow, no matter how obvious it is. And we've done it over some stuff where a seller ghosted and it was really obvious what was going on and we had no fears. But for the most part, a title agent can't release escrow unless one of two things occur: the parties agree, or a judge orders. A judge's order only happens after a lawsuit. Nobody's filing a lawsuit over one of these issues unless there's a lot of money at stake. But the reality is, if the buyer thinks they're going to sit back and be coy and drag their heels on getting the employment records or trying to get a denial letter or whatever so they can get out of the deal and get into another deal, the seller has the right, and the seller's agents have the right to contact the mortgage broker under the contract and say, how are things going? This is not known by many agents. It can really hurt a buyer that thought they would stall and the mortgage broker would give notice of non-financing, cancel the property A to get into B. So
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Jim. So let's say, you know, you're a seller, right? And you all of a sudden got this deal under contract, but all of a sudden a higher offer comes in the meantime, and the buyer didn't make applications within the 5 days of the effective date to a lender. Or like, you know, he goes to the listing agent and goes, hey, can you call the buyer's lender to see if they did application here, because we got this other deal they want to buy, and they didn't. Could at that point, could the seller, you know, say, hey, we're out of contract, your breach of contract?
the seller has the right to cancel at the end of the loan approval period.
Okay.
But if the buyer is exercising bad faith and they don't get their loan, then they can absolutely sit on the deposit if they want. The seller could require that the deposit gets sat on. Now, let's just suppose they make application after 6 days and they get their loan. No harm, no foul, right? But if you find out later that they made their application on the 6th day and they got a letter of denial, and your seller wants to you know, they say to you, hey, Wendy, you know, do we have to give the money back? The bright agent says, Wendy says, no, you don't have to give the money back because they were supposed to make their loan app in 5 and they made their loan app in 6. Here's an email from the lender that says they weren't timely. Now, do I want everybody to make these things litigious or hard? Absolutely not. But just understand how the contract works so that when your client asks you poignant questions, you guys know the exact answers and they think you're a genius. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the seller can't claim breach of contract if they don't make the application within 5 days, only at the point of the financing contingency, you know, where they don't have the loan approval. Let's say usually it's 30 days, right? So
I mean, you're kind of using a shield you're trying to turn a shield into a sword.
yeah.
So you have this provision that says buyer is supposed to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And if they don't, seller has remedies. I wouldn't say that if but I think all that goes away in the practical world. If the seller gets their loan and they didn't make their application until the 20th day, what's your claim going to be? You know, it's not like,
Yeah, it's definitely less relevant now, but like when it was the market was really hot, right? We're at multiple
sure.
offers.
Yeah, but you would still have to wait till the end of the loan approval period.
Okay, good.
If you wanted to preemptive, I think if I understand what you're saying, like your question is, if you want to preemptively cancel a contract because they made their application on the 6th day, would that be a material default? I wouldn't even, you know, if a client ever called me, a seller called me and said, hey, I want to cancel the contract because they applied on the 10th and they said they'd apply on the 5th. I wouldn't take that case. I wouldn't take that client.
Good. All right, that clears that.
As an aside, just so you guys are aware, this isn't a class about inspections, but the inspection provision works the same way. So the inspection provision says that you're going to have whatever days you describe to inspect the property, and the buyer can cancel during that inspection period for any reason. They wake up in a bad mood, they can cancel. However, the seller does not have to automatically authorize the release of deposits. So those are the 2 times when buyers can legit cancel, that sellers can actually tie up buyers and make them have heartburn. And if you're an agent that's giving bad advice, I've seen it boomerang where they say, oh, just cancel and we'll get our money back and jump into another property. Well, the buyer went to cancel and the seller said, I'm out of town and the damage you did to my property during inspections was significant. And even if it's not, I need to do some inspections and we're going to sit on your deposits for 30 days while we get the proper inspections. And so the buyer didn't get their deposits back right away. Again, what are the 2 cases? What are the 2 fact patterns needed to disperse escrows? Parties agree or a judge orders. If the buyer says I canceled during inspections and the seller says I need to do inspections to make sure you didn't degrade my property, it says right here, if buyer timely terminates, the deposit shall be paid and returned to the buyer. Thereupon buyer and seller shall be released of all further obligations. However, Buyer shall not be responsible for prompt payment of such, let's see.
No,
Whoever
shall-
buyer shall be responsible for prompt payment of such inspections for repair and damages to the restoration of the property resulting from such inspections, and shall provide seller with paid receipts. So I've used the example a bunch of times, the expensive house, the driveway, the buyer destroyed the driveway, it was paved with tiles, quarter of a mile long, couple $100,000 in damage, several $1 million property, and they tied up the deposits for a long time. If anybody has any questions, we can talk about it, but those are the two times that sellers can really make life miserable for buyers if they're in bad faith or they damage the property during inspections. Let's see. We just talked about that, line 100. Loan approval which requires buyer to sell real property shall not be considered a loan approval unless addendum V is attached. Buyer's agents must ask the mortgage broker or read the loan commitment. Gone are the days of not reading loan commitments and just sending loan commitments over to seller's agents. We're going to go in and we're going to talk about why that's important in a minute, but just realize, and I've seen it happen, where everybody thought the buyer would get a loan, and the agents are on the podcast today. Everybody thought the buyer would get a loan. They didn't get notice of whether they got the loan or didn't get the loan, and they sent over a loan commitment that said it was contingent on the sale of buyer's other property. They didn't give notice they got the loan. That loan commitment was not a loan approval, and then the seller canceled. Is everybody with me? Where does it say in there? Contract loan approval, which requires the sale of other property, shall not be considered loan approval. If you don't send, if all you sent to the other side was a copy of the loan commitment and it had that provision in there, you sent them nothing. If you send them nothing, the seller has 3 days after the expiration of the loan approval period to cancel the contract. If you have a seller that wants to be tough, and I've seen sellers use this to lever buyers into more money to close, where they have kids starting school and they have job commitments that have to be made. I've seen sellers cancel contracts in rising markets and lever buyers into bad positions where they had to pay more money. If anybody has a question, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to roll on. Line 108. Here's your best friend. I shouldn't say nobody does this. Buyer authorizes buyer's mortgage broker, lender, and closing agent to disclose such status. So you have authorization as a selling agent from the beginning of the transaction to contact the mortgage broker or the title company as much as you need, as much as reasonable, and you do so in writing. And there's only a handful of agents that I know of that regularly check in with the mortgage broker, and I hope they're all on this podcast, because this is the sharpest group of agents in Palm Beach County and north that would be doing these things. And that's what you need to do, so that if that issue ever arises where the buyer can't get their loan, you're not going to your client last minute as a selling agent and saying, oh, they didn't get their loan. You're way ahead of the ball. Line 110. I was looking at this again last night. Tajay brought to my attention that the contract had been reviewed and renewed, and I wanted to look it over before the podcast. I don't know what this means, but we're going to figure it out on this podcast right now. So line 110, it says, buyer shall, upon written request, keep seller and broker fully informed about the status of buyer's broker, mortgage loan application, loan processing, appraisal, loan approval, including any property-related conditions of the loan approval. Keep in mind the property-related conditions for a minute, but that's not the topic of this discussion right now. Buyer authorizes buyer's mortgage broker, lender, and closing agent to disclose such status and progress and release preliminary and finally executed closing disclosures and settlement statements as appropriate and allowed. What is meant by that word allowed? So here's the only thing I can come up with. I'm thinking buyer may be able to limit sellers' inquiries if they choose to do so, but that would be in writing with notice to sellers and would be a move of bad faith in my mind and raise yellow flags. So what does that look like? I stumbled onto that word allowed last night when I was looking at this thing again. And I promise you I won't get into the weeds.
Yeah.
I have no idea why they put it in there, but
Why?
let's just say if you were a buyer in the beginning of your transaction, you didn't want people to be able to stay aware of what was going on, you could write a notice and it would say no one's allowed to contact the mortgage broker. That would be just like any other term of the contract saying, you know, the price is gonna change or the inspection period is gonna change. It's limiting things that are allowed in the contract. So that would be a giant yellow flag.
Yep.
But
I mean, Kristen just chimed in, you know, she said, I check in on every deal with the lender, and I have some mortgage brokers refuse info and updates, even after pointing out that line in the contract. So I guess that word allowed, I mean, it's weird. I don't know why they even have that.
allowed has to, the only thing I can come up with, Ryan, is that would have to be something that the buyer said, we're not going to allow this to happen in the transaction. And that
So
would
the
be
buyer
just
would
like
have to put an additional, online, section, 20, you know,
or send a notice or an email around
I
everybody and
mean,
say, we're not going to allow anybody to talk to the mortgage broker. But that's just like sending an email around that's saying it's a $400,000 contract and we're only going to pay $390. You know what I mean? That's the change of a material term in the agreement.
I know.
So just be aware that's there.
Yeah.
And I applaud, who was it? Christian, you said?
Yeah. Kristen said
Kristen?
yep.
I applaud Christian for doing that work because I know so many agents don't. And I had a seasoned agent call me just the other day, 40 years in the business, and they said, I've never stayed in touch with the mortgage broker because you're not allowed.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
Maybe it has to do with privacy issues, like if the conversation went beyond why are we stuck at not having an approval? Does this discussion go into why that is, that pertains to like privacy information?
Scott just brings that up. Is this maybe the allowed is personal information like credit score?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think you're only allowed, I mean, I would say, thinking on my feet, the only thing you're allowed to do is update as to status, not update as to justification for that status.
Right, and most lenders just say, "Oh, we're still in underwriting," or they don't ever get into the granular pieces of like, "Oh, we can't verify their income." It's always
Well,
like we're just
on my
circling.
side, that conversation, when you tell them that, Tajay, then there's another question coming after that, is my point.
Why?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. They want to,
Why? I mean, here's the reality. You want to know if they're approved or they're not. You want to know if they're getting their documents back to the lender in a timely manner or not. You want to know if there's any giant hurdles or not. And the mortgage broker can answer those things in yes or no answers. It's when you start getting into the qualifications of why it's a no or why it's a yes that a mortgage broker could get into problems on disclosure.
and sometimes when you get loan commitment and you're still 15 days out from closing, some things you have to be within 5 days of closing, like job verification. You got to re-pull a credit score, those things. So you really can't give a 100%. It's still contingent upon a couple of things.
We got to get
lending side has to wait until 5 days before the closing, right, to maybe do a few things. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I guarantee you in any class you've ever attended on the FAR bar, nobody's ever pointed out the allowed word. And if they
We're
have,
getting a lot of questions here, on this, Jim, in the chat. Wendy asks, would it have anything to do with the line 106 and asking for the 106 and asking for the request? Scott says, most mortgage brokers will give you the seller's agent more information than they should, which is good. I've had a good, when I have my listings, pretty good response from lenders, when I reach out to them asking for buyer updates, but, I'm trying to think. I probably had one or two that were hard, and those deals probably didn't close.
and we've had lots of agents call us. I had an agent on this podcast call me not too long ago at all. And they said that the mortgage broker's playing hide the ball.
Yeah.
And like, I think it was Christian said, you know, some agents, some mortgage brokers won't reveal this information, even when you point out the provision in the contract. And I would say, text me. I'm happy to jump on the call in a three-way and find, you know, figure out where that
That's
mortgage
good.
broker
Yeah, I mean,
comes
Amy
from.
Jo said too, especially on creative deals like with hard money lending, those deals are obviously, more unique than a traditional lender.
Well, I'd like to reiterate, you know, when you guys have heartburn and you're working on something, give me a text. I'm happy to jump on a three-way and help
Amazing,
if I
Jim.
can lend some horsepower and get to the bottom of whatever, whether we're closing for you guys or not.
Yep. It's amazing, Jim.
Uh, Line 11, buyer is supposed to give written notice of loan approval. All right, here's where it gets a little bit dicey. What do you send over? Do you send a loan approval or do you send a written notice of loan approval as a buyer's agent? If within the loan approval period, buyer obtains loan approval, buyer shall notify seller of same in writing prior to the expiration of the loan approval period. It
Mhm.
doesn't say that the buyer is sending over the copy of the loan approval.
Just a letter, an
It
email.
just says a letter. And
Yep.
that letter, I want to talk about this, break this down for a minute or go a little bit into the weeds on this a little bit. Whenever you're sending something on behalf of your client, you are not sending an original idea. You are not sending an original thought. You're sending something that was provided to you. You're a conduit. You're not an inventor of original ideas. So when you say to your buyer, "Hey, did you guys get your loan or not?" You're not responding to the other side saying they got their loan or they didn't. You're sending that email, you're sending that message, or forwarding the whatever that says they got the loan or they didn't get the loan. And if the buyer says, "We don't know," you're contacting the mortgage broker and you're saying, "Did you get the loan or didn't get the loan?" Again, I want to be really clear that when you're, because after we did that last podcast, we kind of breezed through this stuff, but I got some calls and they said, "Well, we never do that. We just tell them we got the loan or we didn't." Here's what happens. And hopefully it never happens to one of you guys. And I'll give the inspection one that's the most glaring. Friday, the buyers wanted to cancel for the inspection during the inspection period. And they said to the agent, "Hey, cancel for us." And so the agent sent over an email that said, "Hey, we're canceling during the inspection period. The cancellation letter will be coming on Monday," or something like that. The inspection period ended on Monday evening. And then over the weekend, the buyers went around and looked at other properties, couldn't find anything. And on Monday, they didn't want to cancel. Who's now under the bus? And so if you have your client always send the cancellation letter signed by them,
Yep.
then they can't come back and say, "You really hurt us." In this particular transaction, the buyers came back and said, "Oh no, we didn't really want you to cancel. We were just testing the water." And the agent immediately knee-jerked at the email that said we're canceling. And this goes back to a really fundamental principle with it, which is agency. And an agent doesn't bind a principal. The principal is the buyer. The principal is the seller. An agent can't bind the principal, and all you're doing is making yourself a target for liability when you make representations that should be made by either the mortgage broker or the buyer or the seller. And so what you want to always be is think of being a conduit. You're just the conveyor of information. You're never the inventor of information. We're going to get into a minute when you're going to have to.
Yeah. No, Scott says, yeah, never tell the seller you are canceling until you have a signed contract, which is totally true. And to your point here, is a buyer's agent, the buyer's like, "Oh, we want to cancel." Okay, great. Well, just let them know. Listen, you have 3 more days here. You know what I mean? To cancel this, you got plenty of time. I always talk about buyer's remorse is normal. You'd be surprised. I've had buyers too, like you said, Jim, change their mind from when they said they wanted to cancel, and they said, "Hey, we got a couple days here. We don't have to be in a hurry." And there you go. You just saved a deal. Incredible.
And here's I get a call from on this all the time. You know, when does the time expire? Calendar days based on where the property is located shall be used in computing time periods. And there's a time difference in Florida. Don't forget, parts of Florida are an hour behind. Other than time for acceptance and effective date as set forth in paragraph 3. So those are the only ones that are etched in time. time periods provided for, dates specified in this contract, whether pre-printed, handwritten, or typewritten, or inserted herein, which shall end or occur on a Saturday, Sunday, or national, legal, or public holiday. So there's a statutory list of all those holidays. Don't invent holidays, or don't think holidays will extend inspection periods if they don't. There's a federal list, and you can just have to Google that federal act, and it'll give you that list. So you know for sure. I get calls once a month on that. Um, shall they extend to the next day of the not observed holiday? So it doesn't say anything about anymore about ending at 5 o'clock. So the old contract form in the time provision had time periods ending at 5 o'clock. Under this new version, which isn't the one that came out most recently, but the one before that, they did away with all the 5 o'clock deadlines. Calendar days based on property shall locate just other time acceptance.
So basically, if the financing contingency lands on a weekend, right, you would still have until the next Monday, right?
Yep. And if
Yeah.
Monday is a holiday, then you have till Tuesday. But the thing that screws up agents is the old contract form used to say it rolled over until 5 o'clock the next business day.
It's until midnight.
And now everything is midnight. And there's a time difference in some sections in Florida, but don't forget it's
What
everything
if
is,
their lender is in California and
yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
And there's also a notice provision. Agents call me all the time. These are the standards in the contract. There's a notice provision that says only email is notice. Texting is no longer written notice. So two things to keep in the back of your mind. Let's see, line 111. We talked about that. So that the fact that it says we're going back to the loan approval, whether you send a commitment, a loan commitment, or you send notice that they got their loan, it's on purpose that the contract says written notice of loan approval. That's by design, because there used to be a million arguments about whether they got their loan or they didn't get their loan because there was conditions in there. So the Florida bar drafts people just said, just send them written notice. Then they can't be arguing about whether it's a loan approval or not. Because the argument used to be, oh, you sent us a commitment, but that's not really a loan approval because there's so many conditions. And then they started arguing about the validity or non-validity of certain conditions. Agents, now here's your big decision. Agents must decide if they're going to deliver a written statement or the actual notice of loan approval. In my opinion, the only time I would send the actual loan approval is if it had a provision requiring seller's improvement of the property. We talked about this a little while ago. We're going to come back to it. You don't see it very often, but if the loan approval has a seller-related conditions provision in it, then I would send the loan approval. Because you need to put the seller on notice of their responsibilities to make improvements as early in the deal as possible. You need to do that if you're the seller's agent, and you need to do that if you're the buyer's agent. Is everybody with me? That's a biggie.
yeah. I mean, I haven't had that happen too many times in my career, but I have heard of it happening.
I had it the other day with a condo, small condo. The lender wanted a new roof on the condo, and it cost the buyer a whole lot of money because the buyer's agent failed to put the seller on notice of the lender's seller required property improvements.
Wow.
So it was a small condo. The loan approval said a new roof. The buyer's agent sent over a notice they got their loan, but they never put the seller on notice that it needed to have a roof to close the loan. They got right up to the loan approval. They got right up to the closing date, and I'll show you in a out of the contract and got their money back. All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I guess that point was to be such an appraisal repair. Something came up in the appraisal that something
Yeah.
needed. I guess I had seen it one time that you needed to have some trees cut back from the
Trees
pollen.
cut back, railings tightened up, fascia boards replaced, soffits, gutters, you know, all kinds of little stuff.
I have seen that, yeah.
But this is one of those issues where everybody goes through the red and yellow light and nobody knows there's a problem until somebody says, wait a minute, there's an accident. Now we got to start making a full stop at red lights. Yes, this means agents must review the loan commitments and make decisions about what to deliver. I have seen transactions go south on this issue. Line 122. Here, if seller can make a buyer's life hard, sleepless nights for buyer's agents that can cancel the contract. We talked about that. Line 122. Seller can elect to terminate the contract 3 days after the loan approval date if the buyer failed to give notice they got the loan. We won't beat that dead horse. Line 126. This is where it gets a little bit complicated. Not like it wasn't already before, right? I'm sorry, guys.
Scott just chimed in like every deal should have a critical date sheet with all conditions written out. One thing about using Title Leap is it puts
Do
in
our
the critical
best, yeah.
dates in there, guys. Like this is why I love using Jim for my closings because it puts it all in there, literally, like so everybody can see it. Let's keep going, Jim. Keep going.
All right, line 128 is exactly that provision that we talked about. I'll read you the paragraph, but I just want you to keep in the back of your mind because the paragraph is written very poorly. If there's property-related conditions that the seller is supposed to make improvements to, like the roof, like the railings, like the fascias, like the whatever, as minor and major as they are, if they haven't made those improvements, the buyer can cancel the contract. But if the buyer failed to put the seller on notice of those improvements, the buyer loses their right to cancel. If buyer has timely provided either written notice in paragraph 8 above, thereafter fails to close the contract, the deposit shall be paid to the seller unless the failure to close is due to 1, seller's default, or 2, property-related conditions of the loan approval have not been met unless such conditions were waived. You see where it says loan approval, capital L, capital A. I mean, that's a very it's a very defined document. You can't argue about it. Again, this is one of those provisions. There's a red light and a yellow light in so many transactions, and parties don't even know about it because they just breeze through it, but it can kill deals. So, buyer's agents have to review loan commitments or talk to mortgage brokers and understand the loan commitment terms. Practice takeaways. Sellers can't start cash deals and get a loan. Sellers can start cash deals and get a loan. Sellers hate appraisal contingency addendums. We all know that. We know how to work around that now. Put a loan amount in your contract. Appraisal in the contract. Make this. Appraisal in the contract is not defined. Make sure your buyer acknowledges they got it, your buyer's lender. A denial letter is not required for buyer to kill a deal. You just have to send over written statements. Bonus topic, if you like the way we work and you want us to close for you, no matter where you are in Florida, in paragraph 20, write that the title agent will be New Path Title, and in your normal contract election section under costs, you can just leave it seller pays for title or buyer pays for title. But if you represent one of the parties and you want us to close for you and get Title Leap and all our awesome support, you can just write us in paragraph 20. The closing agent is New Path Title. And I know on this program, everybody knows that this is not necessarily the closing agent. Where is it? Escrow agent. The escrow agent is not the closing agent. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Closing agent is capital C, capital A. The escrow agent is capital E, capital A. And they have very defined terms. All right, you guys, that's all I got. It was my goal to keep it short. I failed in that goal. We got through the.
Oh, you did great, Jim. This has been, I mean, there was some serious gold in this webinar podcast, you know. especially too, obviously with the outline, that's everybody's going to get emailed out, with the homesteading stuff. But we just had a couple quick questions here. Wendy, if they switch from cash to a loan, does an addendum need to be signed?
Nope.
Okay.
As long as they can show up on the closing date, that's what I alluded to at the beginning. They get their money from their mom, their dad, their long lost uncle, whatever, on the day of closing, no matter how they got it, and they can perform. That's all that matters. I mean,
And
it's
I
kind
like
of
to tell
like,
people this. I'd like to tell, like, especially because a lot of times sellers and seller agents will freak out. I'm like, listen, if they don't perform on the day of closing, I'm not saying that you go after the deposit, but their deposit's at risk if their loan doesn't close on that date. However, they want to find that money, let them do it. Just know that on January 31st, they must make that closing happen.
All right.
and,
Yep.
and what are some great alternatives? Seller financing. You have sellers that own their property for a long time. They don't want to pay big capital gains. Pull the seller's financing rabbit out of your hat at the last minute. Hard money loans. We have TO Capital. They do hard money loans. Get creative. Do the things that creative agents do and try to put together deals instead of just falling on your sword. But here's the single best biggie number one tip I'll ever give any agent besides the seller's disclosure clause: fat deposits.
Yeah.
Fat deposits keep deals on track.
Yeah, 100%. Scott said something too, and I know we've discussed this in other webinars about protecting your buyer and putting an interest percentage on the contract. So go down to the financing contingency, Jim, and actually writing a percentage.
All right. Yeah. I thought you were going to say something different, like putting in the contract, like if either party defaults, you put an interest escalator on the amount in escrow. So the escrow amount.
No. I mean, actually on the loan,
You just stumbled onto some freaking gold, Ryan. I got to think about this one a little bit further. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, he has protect your buyers and put an interest percentage on the
Yeah.
contract, a point where like on their loan, on the finance contingency where you can put in rather than like the prevailing rate, you write in an actual amount. If they don't get approved for that amount, well, there you go.
Yep. And we always have arguments over the prevailing rate. Is it the LIBOR, the NIBOR, the Wall Street, whatever. But if you put an interest rate in there, you're going to be, like Ryan said, that's a black or white answer. We're going to start putting a party together once a month, get together, not a party, but just a social over at Sushi Joe, get together and hash out this stuff. Everybody's welcome to join. We talked about the closing cost calculator update. Use title advance, saves deals. Use title advance, saves deals. Use title advance, saves deals. And 24/7 attorney support. Go to newpathtitle.com and click on the attorney support button.
Also, too, yeah, Kristen said, could you elaborate on the seller's disclosure clause, please? And then when is the next meetup? Angela, we're having them every 2 weeks. I want to make sure too that
We're going to have the podcast every 2 weeks, and we're going to have once a month. We're going to figure out what day it's going to be at Sushi Joe upstairs. We'll have a social.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah.
You were saying something and I interrupted. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. I do want to put in here I'm going to put in here the links to New Path Title, newtitle.com.
And then we have the law firm for your evictions, your probates, your ejectments. Everybody know the difference between ejectment and eviction, and your unlawful detainers and all that good stuff. We can get people out quicker than other law firms because we know which tools to rely on.
Good luck on your closing, Scott. We had a great chat. I loved all the activity in the chat today. There's just some great questions. I put the link to New Path Title, guys. Check that out. I love using Jim. But like I said, he's got, this awesome closing software called Title Leap that he's developed and I use. And when I have closings, when I don't have it, I like totally miss it because it keeps track of all the drop dead dates on the contract for you, and everything's there in real time, and you get text and email notifications. Check that out. Definitely check out Title Advance, guys. It's a free service. I use it on all my deals now. It's something Jim offers, titleadvance.io. You can go on New Path Title and order it there. You can actually do it on RealTrade as well under your dashboard, but there's no surprises now of anywhere having, title issues come up for deals that can close. So yeah, and definitely check out, RealTrade. Sign up if you haven't. Jim says the home of the double dip. You can get free free leads from your listings, and then you can network and post to the social. You can sell properties quicker. There's awesome features, guys, that are on RealTrade, free for you to use. Definitely want you to check out. You can get contact with great lenders like Jeff on the platform. Great
How many
attorney.
users are you up to, Ryan?
Almost 3,000, Jim. Just under 3,000. Is that amazing?
I'd love to know, of the 3,000 users, how many listings that represents.
Thousands and thousands. I mean, the average user on RealTrade, sells about 7, to 8 million a year. So, I mean, how many listings is that a year? That's a lot. I mean, we have buyers agents too. So,
Probably
we have buyers.
12 listings.
Yeah,
Wow.
probably 10 transactions a year, probably,
Yeah.
times 3,000. I mean, how many transactions is that? That's a lot. It's 30,000 transactions happening on RealTrade. So
Not a
a lot
bad
of,
feather in your hat, Ryan.
no, it's great, guys. I love it. I mean, I made RealTrade to help us agents. I really do think it's the future, the way that we're doing it. And we monetize a platform from our awesome service providers like Jim and Jeff on this call. So get connected with them there on RealTrade if you haven't. And let's do it. Jim, I want to just say this. I want to thank you for shepherding us through this. Like I said, this is actually in my 6-year career of being in real estate. This last year has been the hardest year. It literally has been the hardest year that I can remember, with all these changes that have happened. And you've literally helped us through this whole process with all these massive changes that have happened in our industry, Jim. So personal thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. It's really rewarding for me at this point in my career.
Yeah.
I get the text from the agent that says, "Hey, I closed with Tajay and his crew, and everything was smooth and everything was great." And the agents that call me and text me and say, "Hey, I used your tip on a whatever."
Yeah.
You do the right thing, the money follows, whether you're an agent or a title agent or anybody in the business.
That's a great thing. Just keep doing the best thing for your clients. Be educated, be knowledgeable,
Educated.
professional. I mean, it just shows, and it's going to keep you in this industry a long time. And it's going to evolve. It's going to change, and we're going to change too, with help people like you, Jim, that are helping us with the change.
Well, I'm pretty blown away at the success rate of the agents that made these Herculean changes. And a couple of shows ago, we talked about Department of Justice, and
I know.
it's kind
Well,
of
the
like,
Department of Justice now is reserved the right now to re-look at the whole thing. I don't know
but
if you.
it's like my wife stopped watching politics a little while ago, and I never followed the news and politics, but it was just in your face so much. It becomes such a big distraction that it keeps you from doing your core, and it kind of paralyzes you. For the new year, I'm going to pay attention to what's going on at the Department of Justice and NAR and things like that, and try to keep you guys ahead of the ball. And certainly form changes and things like that. But just making that a regular part of your daily dialogue. I mean, it's one thing for the content providers to be looking for stories so that
Yeah.
you're on the edge of your seat and having to go to the, whatever it is, Livewire or what's the big
Well,
one?
it's like the old thing, right? If it bleeds, it leads, right? If it just puts you
But
in
it,
fear mode, you're going to click it, read it, and obviously they're selling advertising on their site. So but you're right. At the end of the day, we're not going away, guys. Real estate agents provide tremendous value. We're helping people make the biggest investment of their lives, helping them make a home with their family, and it's not going away. So
SoftBank is probably one of the biggest institutional investors in the world. SoftBank invested 7 or 8 years ago. SoftBank invested a couple billion in Compass, and they invested a couple billion in automation. And their Compass investment paid off bigger than their automation investment. So agents aren't going away.
yep. Awesome, Jim. Well, thanks everybody.
If anybody wants to hang out, you're more than welcome. Other than that, I'm going to sign off.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks, Wendy. All right, bye.